Today I'm going to start this new series where I'm going to model, texture, and animate this beautiful Aston Martin Valhalla. You can follow along this tutorial series even if you are a beginner. I will do my best to explain everything the better I can. The only thing that could help you is a basic knowledge of how to move, scale, and rotate things around in Blender. To make the process easier, we're going to make the car part by part. In this particular video, I'm going to start by making the hood and some air intakes. This series is going to be divided in two smaller sub-series, one where I'm going to model the car and one where I'm going to create a product visualization scene in Unreal Engine. So make sure to leave a like and follow this channel to not miss the next episodes. This said, let's get started. To get additional references, I'm going to use PureRef. You can download it using the link in the description. Delete everything in the scene. First, let's add some preciser images. These images are available completely for free on my Patreon. Duplicate and adjust the reference on all different angles. Make sure to be as precise as possible in order to prevent an asymmetrical model. Now let's model the hood of the car. To maintain better topology, I'm going to create a lattice to form a grid. Enter in the edit mode and scale the lattice to fit the hood. Make sure that the resolution is set to an even number on all dimensions. We're going to model this part first, as it is a simpler and flatter surface to model. Add a cube, select all the vertices, delete and select collapse edges and faces. Now you have only one vertex to work with. Position it here on the outer part of the hood and make sure that it is aligned with the center on the reference by setting your pivot point to 3D cursor and scaling the vertex down to 0 on the x-axis. Now use E to roughly outline the shape of the inner part of our hood. Position every vertex on the side of one of our squares to get better faces in the end. Obviously, I'm going to model only one half of the hood as we can mirror it later. Also, the geometry can be quite simple as we're going to smooth it with a subdivision modifier. Make sure that you have the same number of vertices on opposite sides. For example, here we have 3 vertices, so I'm subdividing these edges to make them 5. Same thing here. On this part, we have 5 vertices, so on the opposite sides, we have to make 5 vertices. Use F to join faces and select this group of vertices to straighten them on the y-axis. Now we have an outline of our hood, but we have to give it tri-dimensionality. To help ourselves see better, let's reduce the opacity of our references. Also, hide this lattice as we don't need it for now. Let's start with these points on front view. Click here on the X-plane perspective and start aligning the vertices here on the top part of the car. Some points aren't visible, so just eyeball it a little bit. Here's where our other references come in handy. Repeat this process on all sides, and after playing for a few minutes with the vertices, you'll have the perfect shape of the hood. Now our shape has to be filled. Connect these 2 vertices as we're going to fill the shape in 2 steps. Select this first edge loop and press Ctrl F, Grid Fill. Sometimes Blender is going to get it right at the first try, but you can always adjust the span and offset values as you prefer. In general, you want your span value to be the number of edges on one of the sides of your mesh. That's also the reason why it's important to have the same number of edges on opposite sides. If you go here in Viewport Shading mode and open this drop-down menu, you can apply a matte cap to detect imperfections and bumps. Unfortunately, here we have to fill a triangle, which is bad for our topology, but don't worry, we're going to fix it later. Now you just have to repeat the same process on the other part, and the game is done. Now, we can concentrate on the headlights and the rest of the hood. We can get our lattice back to outline the outer part of our reference. Then we simply repeat the process we followed earlier. In this case, it's better to not follow the lattice as a reference, as the vertices would be too close from each other. But the important is that the vertices are equidistant as possible. If you want to hide a part of the geometry to get a better vision, select the area you want to hide and press H. Then when you want to unhide it, press Alt plus H. Now I'm going to deal with this triangle. Simply subdivide this edge and trace the outline of the base of our headlight. After spending some time refining the model, I found myself satisfied with this shape. So let's fill this out. I'm going to start by filling this face right here, then using the grid fill to close this part. Now to create that height difference, I'm going to subdivide this edge to form a quad and connect this vertices by maintaining the same number of edges on both sides. Then I fill faces manually. I noticed that this edge is a little bit out of place, so I used Alt plus S to inflate it a little bit. Now we can concentrate on making the headlight. Let's start by creating some more supporting geometry to define this rounded shape. This curvature here is not visible on the reference nor on any image, but is important as it drives the curvature of the headlight. Actually, we don't need this edge. Now let's fill these faces. We don't need this vertex either. Make sure that this curvature is a little bit higher than the previous one, otherwise it's going to look flat. The last curvature has to follow this border of our headlight, and it has to be roughly on the same height as the first that we did. Press Ctrl R to create a loop cut. Finally, we can fill this up and create this little part down here. I'm going to extrude everything down to create the nose of the car and then fill this part. I also want to create the rim of the wheel. Just extrude and deflate inwards. The hood of our car is complete. Now we can use a Solidify and a Subdivision modifier to make it beautiful. I'm going to use 2 levels of subdivision and 1 centimeter of thickness. However, I think you can notice that our shape has some corners that have to be more sharp. For this reason, we are going to use bevels, but first let's mirror our hood on the other side. Position your 3D cursor on this vertex with Shift+2, cursor to selected. Then select everything with A and duplicate with Shift+D. Invert our geometry by scaling our selection by -1 on Y-axis. Now we have a bunch of overlapping vertices. Select everything. Then go here on Mesh, Merge, by Distance to fuse them together. Then select all and click Shift+N to correct the normals. Also, these 2 vertices need to be merged together. Use M to fuse them in the center. Now let's sharpen these edges. All the bevels we need to do have to be done simultaneously because they have a bunch of vertices in common. So make sure to don't make them separately. Press Ctrl+B to make the bevels. Here in the bevel menu, set the shape to 1 and number of segments to 2. Now the hood of the car is complete. On this video, I'm also going to make this air intake up here. So let's start making it. I'm going to start by taking a plane and scaling it to be one of the supports for these little vents. Then I'm going to inset this face down and shape it to be the rest of the shape. Make sure that your model doesn't have any triangles or n-gons to avoid shading issues. Now I'm going to close this part. Make sure to cover the most you can. Now let's model this little vents and the game is done. Finally, to create the other vent underneath, we just duplicate our geometry and delete this unnecessary part. I noticed that here I accidentally created some faulty geometry. Let's fix it. Also, I want to cover this area better. The last thing we got to do is mirror our geometry and make it smooth and clean. I repeated the same process as before, and I also made some bevels and applied some mean creases. Here I had to remake this because they had some shading issues. To connect them again, I selected the edge loops and clicked Bridge Edge Loops. Here I used mean creases to give the shape a little more squareness. And here we have the hood of our Aston Martin Valhalla. In the next video, I'm going to make the sides, the windshield, and the headlights of our car. So make sure to hit the subscribe button to not miss the next videos, and maybe leave a comment to tell me if you like this series or if you like what I'm making. This said, see you on the next part.